My name is Iris, and the moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning at 9:47. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the clock on my computer when I heard myself say the words that would reshape both our lives forever. Cordelia, I need to talk to you about something important. My doctor found a mass during my routine screening yesterday. They're calling it potentially serious, and I'll need surgery next week, followed by treatment that could last several months. She didn't look up from her laptop. Her fingers kept typing. After what felt like an eternity but was probably 15 seconds, she stopped, tilted her head slightly, and asked, "Can you still maintain your current workload?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What kind of support do you need?" Not even basic human acknowledgement that I just told her my life might be in danger. Just a cold calculation about my productivity value. I stood there in her corner office, watching her return to her screen as if I'd simply informed her about a scheduling conflict. The fluorescent light hummed above us. Outside her window, people walked to lunch meetings, completely unaware that in this sterile space, I was realizing my boss had just revealed something fundamental about who she was. Before I continue, could you take a moment to tell me in the comments where you're listening from? I want to know where my story is reaching. And if you're enjoying this, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell because what comes next is going to shock you. I'd worked for Cordelia Hartwell for 3 years at a mid-sized consulting firm. She was brilliant, driven, and had built our department into the most profitable division in the company. Everyone respected her results. What I'd never fully grasped until that moment was how she achieved those results. Cordelia operated from a place of pure logic. Every decision filtered through efficiency metrics. Every human interaction got evaluated for its impact on quarterly goals. She wasn't cruel in the traditional sense. She simply approached people the same way she approached spreadsheets, useful data points to be optimized. Walking back to my desk that Tuesday, something crystallized in my mind. Not anger, that would come later. This was clarity. For the first time, I saw Cordelia with complete objectivity. She had just reduced my potential death to a resource allocation question. Most people would have been furious. Most people would have started planning to quit, to file complaints, to tell everyone what a monster she was. But I'm not most people. I have a master's degree in organizational psychology, and I'd spent years studying human behavior patterns. As I sat at my desk, pretending to work while my world shifted, I realized I had been given an extraordinary opportunity. I was going to teach Cordelia what it felt like to be treated exactly the way she treated others. The surgery went well. The mass was benign, thank God, but I took the full 3 months of medical leave I was entitled to. During those months, I didn't rest. I studied. I observed. I planned. I started by creating what I called my Cordelia file, not evidence for some future confrontation, but a detailed analysis of her behavioral patterns, how she communicated, what motivated her, where she was vulnerable. Most importantly, I studied her personal life. Cordelia was divorced, with a 15-year-old daughter named Quinn who lived with her every other week. She had an aging father in assisted living. She'd mentioned a few friends from her MBA program, though she rarely saw them anymore. She was dating someone named Trevor, a guy she'd met through a professional networking group. Through casual conversations with colleagues who knew her better, I learned that Cordelia's personal relationships had always been complicated. Her ex-husband used to complain that she treated their marriage like a business partnership. Her daughter was increasingly rebellious. Her father's advancing dementia frustrated her because she couldn't fix it with logic and planning. What fascinated me was that Cordelia genuinely didn't understand why her personal life felt so empty. She applied the same systematic approach to relationships that made her successful at work, then wondered why people seemed to drift away from her. By the time I returned to work in January, I had a complete strategy. My first day back, Cordelia called me into her office. She looked uncomfortable, probably realizing she should ask about my health. "Iris, welcome back. How are you feeling?" "Completely recovered, thank you. Ready to dive back into making this quarter successful." She relaxed visibly. This was language she understood. "Excellent. I've been looking forward to having you back on the team. Your analytical skills were definitely missed." And there it was, my opening. Over the following weeks, I began implementing what I came to think of as the Cordelia method, treating every human interaction as a data point to be optimized. But I didn't apply it to strangers or colleagues. I applied it exclusively to Cordelia herself. It started small. When she mentioned feeling tired after a long week, instead of offering sympathy, I asked about her sleep efficiency metrics and whether she'd considered optimizing her evening routine for better performance outcomes. When she seemed frustrated with Quinn's latest bout of teenage attitude, I suggested she might benefit from setting clearer KPIs for their relationship and implementing regular performance reviews. The beauty of it was that Cordelia didn't recognize her own language being reflected back at her. If anything, she seemed pleased to finally have a colleague who understood business realities. She started seeking my advice more frequently. "Trevor seems distant lately," she mentioned one afternoon in March. "I can't figure out what his problem is. Have you considered whether this relationship is meeting your established objectives?" I asked, keeping my tone professionally neutral. "What specific outcomes were you hoping to achieve through this partnership, and is he delivering against those metrics?" She actually pulled out a notepad and started writing. "That's a really good framework for thinking about it." I watched her make notes about relationship ROI and emotional efficiency standards and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not satisfaction. This was too important for petty satisfaction. This was surgical. The systematic approach accelerated through spring. When Cordelia mentioned her father's worsening condition, I helped her create a care optimization plan that treated his humanity like a resource to be managed. When she felt overwhelmed by Quinn's emotional needs, I suggested implementing communication protocols that would streamline their interactions for maximum effectiveness. By May, I had become Cordelia's most trusted advisor. She promoted me to senior consultant and started inviting me to higher-level strategy meetings. Other colleagues commented on how well we worked together, how aligned our thinking was. "Iris just gets it," Cordelia told our director during my performance review. "She understands that business success requires clear thinking, not emotional noise." What she didn't realize was that I was methodically applying her exact approach to every aspect of her personal life. When Trevor broke up with her in June, citing that he felt more like a vendor than a boyfriend, I helped her analyze what went wrong through efficiency frameworks. When Quinn started asking to spend more time at her father's house, I suggested Cordelia conduct a stakeholder satisfaction survey to identify areas for improvement in their mother-daughter dynamic. The most devastating part was watching Cordelia embrace these approaches. She genuinely believed I was helping her become more effective in her personal relationships. She started treating her father's dementia like a project management challenge, her daughter's emotional development like a performance improvement process, her friendships like networking opportunities to be optimized. By August, the results were becoming visible. Cordelia seemed increasingly isolated, though she couldn't identify why. Her remaining friends had started declining her invitations after she began evaluating their friendship value proposition. Quinn had stopped confiding in her about anything meaningful, responding to her mother's communication optimization attempts with polite but distant compliance. Even her relationship with her father had become purely transactional, efficient 15-minute visits focused on ensuring his care metrics were being met. The beautiful, terrible irony was that Cordelia was more successful at work than ever. Our department exceeded targets 3 quarters in a row. She received recognition from senior leadership for her innovative management approaches. She was being considered for a vice president position. But her personal life was collapsing in exactly the same systematic way she had built her professional success. The breaking point came on a Friday evening in September. Cordelia knocked on my office door at 6:30 p.m., looking exhausted and somehow smaller than usual. Most of the office had emptied out, but I was still there, working on a project proposal. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat down heavily and was quiet for a long moment. "I think something's wrong with me," she finally said. I waited. "I feel like I'm losing everyone. Quinn barely talks to me anymore. My father's caregiver says he seems anxious when I visit. Trevor." She trailed off, then laughed bitterly. "Trevor told me I made him feel like a quarterly business review." She looked up at me with something I'd never seen in her before: genuine vulnerability. I don't understand what's happening. I'm trying to be more effective, more strategic about my relationships, but everyone seems to be pulling away, even my friends. I invited Claire to dinner last week, and she said she was busy, but then I saw her social media posts about having people over that same night. I maintained my neutral expression, though inside, something was crystallizing. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 8 months. "What do you think might be causing these patterns?" I asked, using the same tone she'd used with me that Tuesday morning when I'd told her about my diagnosis. "I don't know," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. "I feel like I'm speaking a different language than everyone else, like there's something fundamental about human connection that I'm missing." She put her head in her hands. "I used to have close relationships. I used to feel connected to people. But somewhere along the way, everything became about efficiency and results and optimization. I can't remember the last time someone sought me out just because they wanted to spend time with me." I leaned forward slightly. "How is this affecting your productivity?" The question hung in the air between us. Cordelia's head snapped up, and for the first time in 8 months, I saw complete recognition in her face. She stared at me for what felt like an eternity. I watched her process not just my words, but the tone, the timing, the clinical detachment. I watched her recognize her own methodology being applied to her deepest pain. "Oh my God," she whispered. The recognition was spreading across her features like water soaking through fabric. She wasn't just hearing her own words reflected back. She was finally seeing the architecture of how she'd been treating people for years. "You've been," she started, then stopped. Started again. "This whole time, you've been treating me exactly the way I—" She couldn't finish the sentence. I stayed silent, letting her work through it. This was her moment of realization, and it needed to belong completely to her. "That day you told me about your diagnosis," she said slowly. "I asked if you could maintain your workload." I nodded. "And you've been asking me that same question, in different forms, about everything in my life that matters to me." Another nod. Cordelia sat back in her chair, and I watched 8 months of systematic isolation finally make sense to her. Every failed relationship, every moment of growing distance, every time someone had pulled away from her, she was seeing it all through the lens of her own methodology applied back to her. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "Since that Tuesday morning when you reduced my potential death to a resource allocation question." We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, the city was settling into evening. Inside her office, Cordelia was reckoning with the discovery that she hadn't just created a cruel management style. She'd created a philosophy that, when consistently applied, transforms humans into productivity algorithms. Finally, she spoke again. "The worst part is that it worked. Your approach, my approach, it actually isolated me from every person I care about. And I helped you do it because I thought you were making me more effective." She looked at me with something between admiration and horror. "You didn't destroy my career. You made me destroy my own humanity, one efficiency question at a time." I expected her to be angry. I expected her to fire me, to storm out, to lash out with the kind of fury that comes from being completely outmaneuvered. Instead, Cordelia did something I hadn't planned for. She started crying. Not the polite, controlled tears of someone trying to maintain professional composure. These were deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere she'd locked away years ago. She cried for the daughter who had stopped sharing her dreams, for the father whose final years had become a series of optimization checkpoints, for Trevor and all the other relationships she'd systematically dismantled with her relentless focus on efficiency. "I've been doing this to people for so long," she said between sobs. "Not just you, everyone. My whole life became about extracting value instead of creating connection." I sat there watching her fall apart, and something unexpected happened. The cold satisfaction I'd anticipated feeling was nowhere to be found. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. Cordelia hadn't just been my target. She'd been trapped in the same system she'd created, unable to see how it was destroying everything she actually wanted. "Why didn't you just quit?" she asked, wiping her face with tissues from the box I handed her. "Why go through all this when you could have just walked away?" Because walking away wouldn't have taught you anything. You would have found another Iris to treat the same way. Another person whose humanity you could reduce to productivity metrics. She nodded slowly. So you turned me into a case study of my own philosophy. I turned you into the recipient of your own philosophy. We sat in that truth for a while. Outside, the cleaning crew had arrived, their voices carrying down the hallway as they began their evening routine. What happens now? Cordelia asked. It was a fair question. I'd spent 8 months executing this plan, but I hadn't really thought through what came after the moment of realization. Revenge stories usually end with the target's destruction or the protagonist's triumphant exit. But sitting across from Cordelia as she grappled with what she'd become, I realized this wasn't really about revenge anymore. I don't know, I admitted. I thought I'd feel more vindicated. Instead, I just feel tired. I need to fix this, she said suddenly. Not because it's affecting my performance metrics or threatening my promotion. Because I've turned into someone I don't recognize, and I've hurt people who didn't deserve it. You can't optimize your way back into people's lives, Cordelia. Relationships don't work like business projects. Then how do I start? I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. Underneath the controlled exterior and the strategic thinking, there was a person who had somewhere along the way forgotten how to simply be human with other humans. You start by accepting that some things can't be measured or improved or made more efficient. Some things just have to be felt. Over the following weeks, something shifted between us. Not friendship. Too much had happened for that. But a strange kind of professional respect mixed with mutual understanding. Cordelia began the slow work of trying to rebuild her relationships, and I watched her struggle with approaches that didn't involve frameworks or optimization strategies. She started having lunch with Quinn without any agenda, just listening to her daughter talk about school and friends and the boy she had a crush on. She visited her father and sat with him while he told the same stories from his childhood over and over, not trying to redirect him toward more productive conversation. The changes were small and imperfect. Quinn was cautious about opening up again. Her father's condition continued to decline, regardless of how present she tried to be. Trevor didn't come back, and honestly, their relationship had probably been damaged beyond repair anyway. But I watched Cordelia begin to understand something she'd forgotten, that the messy, inefficient, unmeasurable parts of human connection were actually the only parts that mattered. At work, our dynamic became complicated. Cordelia couldn't exactly discipline me for applying her own methodology too effectively. I hadn't violated any policies or failed to meet any objectives. If anything, my performance had been exceptional, but we both knew that our professional relationship had fundamentally changed. I've been thinking about your promotion, she said during our quarterly review in November. I assumed that was off the table. Actually, I think you should take the position. You've demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that this department needs. You understand systems and human behavior in ways that could benefit the entire organization. I studied her face, looking for the angle. And you're comfortable working under someone who spent 8 months systematically isolating you from everyone you care about? No, she said honestly. But I'm not comfortable with a lot of things about myself right now. The question is whether we can find a way to work together that doesn't involve either of us treating people like productivity metrics. It was a fair point. I'd proven I could be just as coldly calculating as she was. Maybe more so, because I'd done it with full awareness of the human cost. I accept the promotion, I said, but with conditions. Such as? We implement new policies around employee support during health crises. Real support, not just legal compliance. And we start evaluating management performance based partly on employee well-being metrics, not just financial outcomes. Cordelia smiled for the first time since that Friday evening in September. You want to systematically engineer more humanity into our workplace. I want to create systems that support people being human instead of just being productive. I can work with that. My first act as department director was to institute monthly one-on-one meetings that had nothing to do with performance or targets. Just check-ins, where employees could talk about whatever was on their minds. Some people were suspicious at first. They'd learn to be wary of any interaction with management that didn't have a clear business purpose. But gradually, people began to open up. Maria talked about her son's learning disability and how school meetings were affecting her afternoon productivity. James mentioned his mother's cancer diagnosis and how the uncertainty was making it hard to focus on long-term projects. Rachel shared that she was going through a divorce and some days just needed to leave early to pick up her kids. Instead of treating these conversations as problems to be solved or inefficiencies to be managed, we started treating them as information that could help us support our team members as whole human beings. Flexible schedules, temporary workload adjustments, employee assistance resources, not because they improved productivity, but because they were the right thing to do. The remarkable thing was that productivity actually did improve, but as a byproduct of people feeling supported rather than as the primary goal. Cordelia and I developed an unusual working relationship. She remained as my supervisor, but she often sought my input on decisions that involved employee relations. We'd both learned something about the dangers of reducing human complexity to operational metrics, and we tried to create policies that acknowledged the full humanity of our workplace. It wasn't perfect. Old habits are hard to break, and sometimes one of us would catch the other slipping into efficiency optimization mode during conversations about genuinely human concerns. But we developed a shorthand for calling each other out. Productivity question? One of us would ask when the other started treating a human situation like a business problem. Productivity question. The other would acknowledge, and we'd start over. The real test came 8 months later when one of our newest employees, a young man named Felix, came to me with news that his partner had been in a serious car accident. He was shaken, clearly struggling to process what had happened, and trying to figure out how to balance being present for his partner's recovery with his responsibilities at work. As he sat in my office, explaining the situation through tears he was trying to control, I felt the old impulse kick in, the urge to immediately start calculating coverage plans and project reassignments, to ask about timelines and deliverables and how we could minimize the impact on our quarterly goals. Instead, I took a breath and asked, "What do you need right now?" Felix looked surprised. I'm not sure. I've never dealt with anything like this before. Take all the time you need to figure that out. Family medical leave, flexible schedule, temporary project reassignment, whatever helps you be where you need to be. We'll handle the work logistics. After he left, Cordelia stopped by my office. I heard Felix talking to Janet about his partner's accident. How did your conversation with him go? I offered him whatever support he needs to focus on his family right now. No questions about maintaining his current workload? We looked at each other, both remembering that Tuesday morning that had started all of this. No questions about maintaining his current workload, I confirmed. Good, she said. That's how it should be. As I write this, it's been almost 2 years since that Friday evening when Cordelia finally understood what I'd been doing. We still work together, though our relationship remains complex. She's made progress in rebuilding connections with Quinn and has found ways to be more present with her father. She's even started dating again, though she jokes that she has to consciously resist the urge to create relationship optimization plans. I've grown into my role as department director, and I've learned that there's a difference between strategic thinking and systematic dehumanization. The line between them is thinner than I'd realized, and it requires constant attention to stay on the right side of it. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did to Cordelia. It's a complicated question. I don't regret teaching her what it felt like to be treated the way she treated others. I don't regret forcing her to confront the human cost of her methodology. But I do sometimes wonder if there might have been a way to create that realization without becoming the very thing I was trying to teach her not to be. The truth is, revenge isn't really about the other person. It's about what we're willing to become in pursuit of justice. In my case, I was willing to become exactly as cold and calculating as Cordelia had been. I was willing to spend 8 months treating her humanity as a problem to be solved, rather than a reality to be respected. The difference was that I did it consciously, with full awareness of what I was sacrificing. Cordelia had done it unconsciously, gradually eroding her own capacity for genuine human connection, without realizing what she was losing. Maybe that makes what I did better. Maybe it makes it worse. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that both of us learned something essential about the difference between treating people as resources and treating them as human beings. We learned that efficiency and compassion aren't opposites, they're just different values. And which one we prioritize shapes not just our professional success, but our entire capacity for meaningful relationships. Looking back, I think that Tuesday morning when I told Cordelia about my diagnosis was the moment we both started down a path that would change us fundamentally. I just happened to be the one who chose the direction we traveled. If this story affected you the way it affected me to live through it, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button, because it tells me you understand what I went through. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done differently. I read every single one. And subscribe because I have more stories that will change how you see the world. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.